She was only 6 years old when her stepmother dragged her onto that makeshift auction stage. Beside her, her twin sister trembled silently, too young to understand the price being put on their lives. No one in the crowd moved. No one dared. Until a man with nothing left but his name and a broken heart stepped forward and changed everything. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and everyday miracles speak to your heart, consider subscribing. One click helps us bring more of these true-to-life inspirations into the world, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Now let's begin. The old livestock barn still smelled faintly of manure, though no cow had been here in years. Dust hung in the slivers of sunlight cutting through the warped roof boards. Rusted cattle gates had been pushed aside to create a makeshift stage. And tonight, like every last Saturday of the month, it wasn't animals being sold. It was people. Children, mostly. Callan Brooks stood near the back, his broad shoulders slouched slightly under a faded denim shirt, the collar upturned more out of habit than against any real wind. At his side, his 10-year-old son Rowan gripped his hand with quiet trust. The boy's pale eyes, filmed by blindness, scanned nothing. His hearing was dulled, too. Callan had to speak slowly and clearly near his left ear for him to catch much. But tonight, Rowan said nothing, and that was perhaps the heaviest weight on Callan's heart. He shouldn't be here. Every bone in his body told him to leave, to take Rowan, and get out before the smell of desperation settled on him like it had on the others. But then she was dragged forward. 2 girls, 6 years old, maybe 7, identical in their bruises and bare feet, but not in spirit. One stood tall, defiant even in her trembling. The other clung to her sister's sleeve, her bottom lip quivering like a leaf in storm wind. The woman behind them, gaunt, sharp-eyed, and reeking of stale gin, jerked their arms as she shoved them into the spotlight. "This here's a 2-for-1, she sneered, waving a cigarette in the air. "Good girls. Know how to wash, cook, stay out of the way. I raised 'em right, startin' at 200. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Men shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a church coat clutched her handbag tighter. Callan felt something cold unfurl in his gut. The girls weren't flinching at the yelling. That was the worst part. They were used to it. He looked at Rowan. His son tilted his head slightly, sensing the tension, but seeing nothing. "No takers," the woman barked. "Fine, 150. They'll work. They know fear. And they don't cry no more. That's valuable." Callan's jaw locked. He didn't plan this. He didn't come here with anything but a broken radiator to deliver and maybe sell for scrap. But something about the hollow look in the taller twin's eyes, something about how she curled her arm instinctively around her sister, made it impossible to walk away. $78, he heard himself say. And 3 cents. Every head turned. The woman on the stage squinted. "What? That's what I've got. You want them to go to someone who won't use them. Someone who'll feed them and let them sleep indoors. Then it's all I can offer." A silence blanketed the room, heavy and disbelieving. The stepmother scoffed. $78. For 2 mouths to feed, I'm not buying mouths, Callan said. His voice was low but unwavering. "I'm giving a home." He stepped forward and reached into his worn leather wallet. The coins clinked louder than they should have. Then from the shadows behind the crowd, a voice rang out, smooth, female, unmistakably in control. "I'll cover the rest." All eyes turned. At the top of the old stairs stood a woman in a long coat face, partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her gloved hand held a thin envelope, which she passed to the man running the auction. No one recognized her, and no one dared ask. The stepmother's eyes lit with greed. Dun Callan looked toward the woman, but she was already walking away, boots clicking against the barn's wooden floor. She didn't look back. He turned to the twins. "Can you walk?" The one holding her sister nodded. Callan bent down. "I'm Callan. This is Rowan. You're safe now." "Understand." The girls didn't reply, but the way they stepped down from the platform, hands clasped tightly like lifelines, was answer enough. They rode home in Callan's rust-streaked pickup under a sky that had begun to snow. He gave Rowan the front seat and wrapped the twins in the only 2 spare jackets he owned, both of which smelled faintly of sawdust and diesel. Neither girl spoke, but the younger one eventually fell asleep against her sister's shoulder. The older one stared out the window like she was still trapped on the platform. "What are your names?" he asked gently. The older one hesitated. "Aurelia," she whispered. "She's Lyra." "Pretty names," Callan said. "You girls hungry?" They didn't respond, but their silence was an answer in itself. When they arrived at the cabin, 2 rooms, a stove that hiccuped on cold mornings, and a fireplace that rarely had more than embers. Callan unlocked the door, switched on the overhead light, and let them step into their new world. The living room was small, worn but clean. Rowan's books were stacked carefully on the old coffee table labeled in Braille and marked with rubber bands. Callan watched as Aurelia scanned the space eyes darting to every corner, assessing it like she might need to defend herself. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, gesturing to the pull-out couch. "Blankets are clean. I'll fix something warm." Aurelia didn't move. Her fingers brushed the edge of the couch like it might vanish. Callan crouched to her level. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "You're just home now." "That's it." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not trust, but maybe the memory of what it felt like. In the kitchen while boiling water for soup, Callan looked through the window. Snow fell in gentle sheets. He thought of the woman at the auction. The way she spoke. The way she disappeared. Who was she? And why him? But those were questions for another day. Tonight, 3 children were asleep under his roof, and the quiet hum of Rowan breathing in the next room was the only answer he needed. Morning came to the cabin, slowly creeping in through the frost-laced windows, as though unsure if it was welcome. The old wood stove coughed twice before giving in to flame, and Callan Brooks stirred from the recliner. He'd fallen asleep in his back, aching, the blanket over his chest half slid to the floor. He listened for a moment. Silence. But not the hollow kind. The kind filled with sleeping breath and something fragile like hope. He rose, quietly stepped past the worn carpet and peeked into the living room. Aurelia and Lyra lay curled together on the pull-out couch, blanketed head to toe. Only the younger one's tiny hand peeked out, still gripping her sister's shirt, even in sleep. Rowan was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the braided rug, one hand on his talking storybook. It didn't make a sound. Batteries long dead. But he turned the pages anyway, letting his fingers trace the raised lines. "Morning, buddy," Callan whispered, kneeling beside him. "Sleep okay?" Rowan turned, slightly a slow nod. Callan placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "We have guests now. Girls. Remember." The boy nodded again, this time a little faster. "They'll be part of our family for a while," Callan said. "We help them. They help us. That okay with you?" Rowan's hand found Callan's and held it for a moment. That was all the answer he needed. In the kitchen, Callan made oatmeal with a splash of canned milk and a spoonful of brown sugar he'd been saving for a holiday that never came. He set the table 4 cracked bowls, 4 mismatched spoons, and 4 tin cups filled with lukewarm water. He paused, stared at the empty chair, then went back and added a 5th setting. When the girls awoke, Aurelia moved first, brushing hair from her sister's eyes and helping Lyra sit up. She guided her like someone much older, someone who'd learned the world could turn violent at any moment, and chose instead to shield someone smaller. Callan greeted them with a warm morning, his voice careful not too loud, not too soft. He offered them oatmeal. Lyra eyed the bowl suspiciously. "We don't have to clean something for it." "No," Callan replied. Aurelia squinted at the spoons. "They match," he smiled faintly. "Not even close." Rowan sat already, waiting, fingers poised above his bowl, like he could feel the heat radiating from it. "Come on," Callan said, gesturing to the table. "Let's eat." The five of them sat down at the table. It was the first time Callan had used every seat since his wife passed away 6 years earlier. Back then, Rowan was just a baby. The extra chairs had gone cold, with time pushed into corners, holding mail and dust and little else. Now there were elbows brushing accidental nudges, awkward glances across oatmeal. It was quiet. Yes, but alive. Halfway through breakfast, Rowan reached out tentatively and tapped the table twice, then 3 times. Aurelia noticed first. "He's counting," she said softly. Callan looked up. "You understood that he tapped like we used to?" "In the dark," she said. 1 tap was yes, 2 was no, 3 meant I don't know. Callan blinked. "You made that up," she nodded slowly. It was the only way to talk when she'd lock us in the closet. A silence fell like a snowdrift. Callan put his spoon down. "Well, maybe we keep that code going. Could be useful." Rowan smiled. It was faint, but it bloomed like dawn through mist. After breakfast, the children helped with small chores. Aurelia wiped down the counter. Lyra swept without being asked. Rowan, inspired by his new companions, asked by tapping to help bring in firewood. They worked like people used to doing everything for survival. No fuss, no dragging feet. Just quiet movement and the occasional sideways glance, like they were waiting for punishment that never came. Callan watched them from the doorway, heart-twisting. That afternoon, he pulled out an old box of blankets and found one with butterflies. He laid it at the end of the girl's makeshift bed. "Hadn't seen this in years," he murmured. "My wife's favorite." Aurelia stared at the blanket for a long while. Then carefully she folded it and placed it over Lyra's shoulders before crawling under it herself. That night, Callan sat by the fire while Rowan leaned against him, head tucked into his arm. The girls lay nearby, whispering softly in their twin language. Half words, murmured sighs, rhythmic like breathing. Later, Callan stared at the ceiling long after the fire dimmed. 5 plates on a table, 3 children under one roof, and a nameless woman in a coat who disappeared as quickly as she came. He didn't know where this path was going. He didn't know if he could afford the next week, let alone the next year. But something in his soul, something buried deep under grief and grit, felt right. Not perfect. Not easy. But good. And good in a world like this was something close to a miracle. The days that followed settled like new snow, soft, but uncertain, beautiful, yet precarious. Nothing in the Brooks cabin moved too fast, but everything was changing. Callan noticed it first in the quiet. It wasn't silence born of trauma anymore, the kind that clung to the girls like frostbite. It was different now, filled with hushed whispers between bunk beds, rustling pages from borrowed books, and the soft padding of bare feet in the morning as they helped one another get dressed in hand-me-downs too big for their frames. The sound of healing was always subtle. Rowan had started sitting closer to the girls during meals, his head tilted slightly, as if listening through vibrations. Callan watched in awe the evening his son reached across the table and gently tapped Aurelia's bowl, 3 soft taps. "I don't know," Aurelia said, smiling. "That's what it means, right?" Rowan gave a quiet nod, then 1 tap. "Yes." Lyra giggled a sound so rare Callan nearly dropped his fork. On the 4th morning, the sun slipped through the pine trees in golden strands, melting away a layer of snow that had blanketed the cabin overnight. Callan stepped onto the porch to chop firewood. and found Aurelia already out there, sitting cross-legged on the top step, her breath visible in the cold air. "You always up this early?" he asked, grabbing his axe. She shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." He paused. "Bad dreams," she didn't answer. Just looked out into the trees. After a beat, she turned to him. "Why did you buy us?" Callan lowered the axe. "I didn't buy you," he said carefully. "I offered everything I had to get you away from her." Aurelia's eyes flicked up. "Why you didn't know us?" Callan sighed and leaned the axe against the railing. "Rowan was about your age when his mom passed. I know what it looks like when a kid's eyes stop hoping." She stared at him, searching for a crack in his voice, a lie in his eyes. She didn't find one. Later that day, Lyra tripped on the rug near the stove and scraped her knee. It wasn't serious, but it bled, and she whimpered louder than anyone expected from a girl so usually tough. Callan knelt beside her, inspecting the wound with gentle fingers. "All right, soldier," he said softly. "Let's clean you up." But before he could rise, Aurelia appeared at his side with a damp cloth and an old first aid kit from the bathroom. "Wait," she said. "I've got it." She pressed the cloth to her sister's knee, then carefully dabbed away the blood. Her movements were slow, precise, far beyond her years. She blew gently to cool the sting, before applying ointment and a Band-Aid. "She's better with wounds than anyone I know," Lyra sniffled. Callan raised an eyebrow. "How'd you learn all that?" Aurelia didn't look up. I watched the nurses. Every time she hit us bad enough to go to the ER. Her voice was flat, matter of fact, but her hands didn't shake once. That night after the kids were in bed, Callan stood at the window, watching the snow fall again. His thoughts wandered to the woman at the auction, the elegant stranger who vanished without a name. He still didn't know who she was, but someone had left a sealed envelope in their mailbox that morning with $100 cash and a note in neat cursive, "Keep going." "You're doing better than you think." He stared at the note for a long time. Who was she? Why him? A week later, Callan drove to the edge of town with Rowan and the twins for their first outing together, an afternoon at the county library. He wasn't sure how they'd be received, especially with 3 children, so visibly different from one another, but he hoped familiarity would soften suspicion. The librarian, a kind widow named Miss Louise, welcomed them with warm eyes. "You're the man who saved those girls?" she whispered as she scanned their library cards. "God bless your heart." Callan didn't correct her. Inside the children's section, Lyra discovered the audiobooks shelf and rushed to show Rowan bouncing on her toes. Aurelia, meanwhile, wandered quietly through the non-fiction aisle until she came to a stop in front of the human anatomy section. She ran her fingers over a book's spine. "I want to know how it all works," she whispered. Callan knelt beside her. "Your body." "No," she said. "How to fix people." He smiled. "Well, this is a good place to start." They left the library with 5 books, 3 smiling children, and something else Callan hadn't expected, a strange sense of forward motion, like the gears of a broken clock ticking back to life. That night, as Callan tucked Rowan in, the boy tapped softly against the mattress. One pause, one. "Yes, yes, yes." Callan frowned. "What are you saying?" "Yes," to Bud. Rowan turned toward him, his pale eyes wide with something like clarity. "She helps," he whispered, voice barely audible. "She makes me hear." Callan froze. "You mean Lyra?" Rowan shook his head. "Aurelia." Callan blinked, overcome with something he couldn't name. Rowan had never spoken so clearly, never used a name before, how he asked gently. "She touches my hand," Rowan said, tapping his palm lightly. "And I know what's real." That night, Callan sat by the fire again, knees aching, heart full. He looked around at the cabin, the drawings taped to the fridge, the muddy shoes by the door, the quiet breath of 3 sleeping children. He had nothing in the bank, no clear plan. But he had a boy who spoke a girl who wanted to heal, and another who made them all laugh again. And somewhere out there, a stranger was watching, guiding, helping. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but tonight, for the first time in years, he didn't dread it. And that Callan thought pulling the blanket over his lap was what hope sounded like. The first real storm of December arrived like an unwelcome visitor, one that didn't knock, but slammed through the hills with ice-laced breath and howling gusts that bent the pine trees sideways. Callan had seen plenty of winters in the mountains of Nevada, but this one came early and mean. He was up on the roof before sunrise, nailing down a loose tin sheet that had started flapping like a broken wing in the wind. He should have replaced it last spring, but should have didn't pay for groceries or shoes. One nail at a time, that was how he held everything together. This roof, this life. Inside the cabin was dim. The power had flickered off twice already, and the heat was unreliable on the best days. Still, the children bustled about with a quiet routine that no one had needed to teach them. Aurelia gathered firewood from the stack. Lyra folded the clothes Callan had left hanging near the stove to dry. Rowan sat cross-legged by the window, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks like an old song. They didn't complain. Not once. At noon, the storm truly hit. The cabin groaned. The power cut out completely. Callan limped back inside, soaked and bleeding slightly from a nail he hadn't seen. He didn't realize the extent of it until Aurelia gasped. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he muttered, brushing snow from his shoulders. Roof's holding. But she was already at the sink, wetting a cloth, pulling down the first aid kit, with the same methodical calm she had shown with Lyra's scraped knee. "Sit," she ordered. Callan did more surprised by the authority in her voice than the wound itself. She cleaned the cut, blew softly on the scrape, and wrapped it tighter than he probably would have himself. Then she looked up at him, not as a child to an adult, but as someone who understood pain intimately. "You can't do it all by yourself." He exhaled long and low. "Someone has to." Aurelia tilted her head. "Not if someone's helping." By mid-afternoon, the cabin was cold, the storm still raging, and Callan could feel the tension rising in the floorboards. Thin walls could only hold so much silence before it cracked into fear. So he lit every candle he could find, including the cinnamon-scented one his late wife had bought years ago that he'd never dared to use. He filled a pot with water, tossed in potatoes, lentils, and the last of the carrots, and stirred slowly over the fire. "Smells like soup," Lyra said hopefully. "Almost," Callan replied. She leaned against his arm. "You're good at pretending things are fine." He gave her a sideways look. "That obvious?" She grinned. "Only to people who've done it too." They ate the soup on the floor near the hearth bowls, cradled in tired hands, spoons clicking softly. There was something sacred in that moment. 5 people huddled close, steam rising into the flickering candlelight, the outside world shut out entirely. Rowan reached for seconds. Callan pretended not to cry. After dinner, Lyra dug out a deck of cards and taught Rowan how to sort them by touch. He couldn't see the numbers, but she let him guess by counting corners and reading patterns on the back. "Club feels like a paw," he said, running his fingers over the face. "And hearts are for girls," Lyra teased. "Boys have hearts too," Rowan replied almost defensively. Callan turned toward the fireplace, hiding his smile. He didn't know where his son had learned to say something so profound, but he was glad. Aurelia sat nearby, still and quiet, flipping through one of the anatomy books from the library. She paused on a diagram of the human ear, touching the parts softly, as if trying to map them back onto Rowan. "You think I'll ever fix it?" she whispered, not realizing she'd spoken aloud. Callan looked over. You're already fixing more than you know. The wind died after midnight. The power didn't come back. Callan found an old radio in the back closet and twisted the dial until it caught the faint hum of a weather report, black ice outages across 4 counties' school closures for the week. No one was coming up the road, not for a while. So they made the most of it. They built pillow forts. They made up stories. Callan taught them how to use a compass, how to read animal tracks in the snow, and how to cook oatmeal without burning it. And in return, the kids taught him how to smile without guilt, how to laugh without flinching, how to see his home not as a ruin, but a refuge. 3 days later, as the storm eased and the sun cracked through the trees, a surprise came with the morning mail. Wrapped in brown paper left in the woodpile by someone unseen was a brand new coat for Aurelia, a pair of fleece boots for Lyra, and a braille watch for Rowan, each tagged with a note in that same elegant cursive: for those who walk through storms with open hearts. No signature, no return address. Callan held the note for a long time, his fingers brushing the paper, like it might disappear if he blinked. Then he smiled just slightly and tucked it into the drawer where he kept the other miracles. The thaw came quietly. One morning in late January, the snow on the cabin's tin roof let go in a soft, wet rush, slipping off in great hunks and landing with a dull thud in the yard. A drip formed just outside the kitchen window, slow, steady, rhythmic. Callan watched it as he sipped his coffee, a worn flannel pulled tight across his shoulders. The scent of wood smoke clung to everything these days, but he didn't mind. It meant they were warm. It meant they had made it through another storm. Behind him, the twins sat cross-legged on the floor, with Rowan, who was tracing letters with his fingers, across an old cereal box that Aurelia had flattened and written on in thick black marker. D. Aurelia said, "Like Doctor." Rowan nodded, running his fingers across the curve. Lyra piped in, "Or D like danger. Or donuts. Or Dad." She shot Callan a cheeky grin. "Lots of things." Callan chuckled. "That's a wide spectrum." "Life is a wide spectrum," Lyra said seriously, as if quoting scripture. He raised an eyebrow. "You're not wrong." Later that day, Callan drove into town to patch a leaking pipe at Miss Louise's bookshop, bringing Aurelia along for company. And because she'd taken to asking questions about everything, valves, wrenches, pressure gauges, she wasn't just curious. She observed like someone gathering knowledge for a reason, like she needed it. "Why does the pipe hiss before it bursts?" she asked. "Because the air gets forced through before the water does," Callan explained. "It warns you. If you listen close." Aurelia thought on that for a long moment. "So people hiss too." He glanced sideways at her. "What do you mean when they're about to break? They hiss first. They say sharp things. Then they cry." Callan didn't know how to respond to that. She was 6, or maybe 7 now. He wasn't sure. Either way, she saw too much. After the job, Miss Louise offered them cocoa and a plate of oatmeal cookies. While they sat in the cozy front nook of the shop, a sharp yelp came from outside, the high, panicked sound of an animal in trouble. Aurelia was on her feet before anyone else. They ran outside to find a golden retriever pup tangled in the neighbor's wire fence, a cut bleeding on its front leg. The neighbor stood nearby looking panicked and unsure. "I'll call animal control," he muttered. Aurelia crouched beside the dog, whispering calmly. "No need." "I can help," she said with a steadiness far beyond her years. Callan approached. "You sure?" She nodded without looking at him. He's scared, but not dangerous. She tore a strip from the hem of her shirt, pressed it gently to the wound, then used a nearby twig and more fabric to create a makeshift splint. All the while, she hummed softly a tune she said her real mom used to hum when they were babies. It wasn't a lullaby. It was steadier than that. Reassuring. The pup stopped shaking. Miss Louise, standing behind Callan, whispered, "That child has healer's hands." Callan didn't reply, but he felt something settle in his chest, something like pride, but deeper. Reverence. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Aurelia sat quietly drawing in one of Rowan's old notebooks. When she held it up, it was a rough but detailed sketch of the dog's leg bones, muscle wound site, all labeled as best as she could manage with her limited spelling. Callan stared. "You remembered that much? From what, the library books?" She nodded. "I want to fix people," she said plainly. Rowan curled next to her, reached for her drawing and gently tapped the page. One tap. "Yes, you're already fixing us," Callan murmured. The next morning a package arrived. No delivery truck, no knock at the door, just a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper sitting on the porch like it had grown there. Inside, a brand new children's stethoscope, a blank white coat, small enough for a child, and a book titled Healing Hands, The Beginner's Guide to Medical Curiosity. A note was tucked inside in that same elegant script, a gift for the girl who already knows what many adults forget, that healing begins with care, not credentials. Callan stood on the porch a long time, the note in his hand, the mountains quiet around him. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves. Somewhere someone was watching them, not from behind cameras or shadows, but with a heart that recognized something worth nurturing. He looked up at the sky and smiled softly. "Thank you," he whispered. When Aurelia opened the box and pulled out the coat, she didn't squeal or dance. She didn't cry. She simply slipped it on, buttoned it with small fingers, and looked down at herself like she had known all along that it would come. She stood taller. "Do I look like a doctor?" Rowan raised one hand and gave a firm thumbs up. "You look like you were born for it," Callan said. She nodded solemnly. "Good. Then I better keep going." That night, Lyra leaned against Callan on the old couch, while Rowan traced letters across her arm. "Do you think Aurelia will really be a doctor one day?" she asked. "I think she already is," Callan said. Lyra smiled. "I want to be something too. Something big. You already are." She shook her head. "No, I mean, something loud. Something that talks back. Something that makes the world pay attention." Callan thought of her voice in the mornings, the way she translated Rowan's taps, the way she carried herself like a tiny firework in a glass jar. He nodded. "You'll find it." And in his heart, he already knew one would heal with her hands, the other with her words. Both were miracles in motion. The snow was mostly gone by February, leaving behind a world half buried in mud and pine needles. In town, the sidewalks were wet and pocked with old salt stains, and the school building, small, square, and sagging slightly at the roofline, looked like it had held more winters than students. It was Lyra's first day there. Aurelia had started attending classes 2 weeks earlier and had already become the quiet, curious child every teacher adored. But Lyra was different. Colin had asked her 5 times that morning if she was nervous. She answered the same way each time with a grin and a shrug. "I'm not nervous," she said, adjusting the blue hairband that held her curls out of her face. "I'm watching." "Watching?" Callan asked. "Yeah, to see who needs someone to say what they can't." He gave a soft laugh, shook his head. "You're 6, almost 7, she reminded him. He opened the truck door for her like she was stepping onto a stage. In many ways she was. By noon, Lyra had already made a mark, and not in the way Callan feared. It happened during lunch. A boy in her class, thin and skittish, dropped his tray near a group of older students. They laughed as he scrambled to pick it up, red-faced and muttering. "You're such a spaz," one boy sneered. "Bet your mom still feeds you with a baby spoon." The cafeteria fell into that uncomfortable hush when everyone hears the cruelty, but no one knows what to do. No one except Lyra. She stood up, loudly. "That's not funny," she said. Her voice clear and ringing off the tile. The group of older kids turned. The boy who'd dropped his tray froze. Lyra took a step forward. "What's funny about someone being nervous, or scared, or needing help?" The ringleader scoffed. "Mind your business, orphan." Lyra didn't flinch. "My business is people like him." Then loud enough for the entire lunchroom to hear, "I used to hide under a bed because my mom's sister said I was too noisy to live in the house. But someone helped me. Someone who didn't have to. So I know what it feels like when nobody speaks up." Silence. Real silence. Then someone clapped. 1, 2, then more. The boy who'd dropped his tray blinked at her like she'd conjured fire. Lyra just sat back down and resumed eating her peanut butter sandwich. Later that afternoon, Callan got the call from the principal's office. He braced for bad news. But instead he was greeted by Mrs. Hewitt, the principal, who sounded more stunned than concerned. "Mr. Brooks, I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "For what?" "For raising a 6-year-old civil rights leader." That evening, Lyra recounted the entire story over dinner with the casual air of someone describing a game of tag. Aurelia blinked. "You stood up to a 5th grader?" "He was a jerk," Lyra said, shoveling mashed potatoes into her mouth. Rowan smiled and tapped the table once. "Yes." Callan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on his youngest daughter, not by blood, but by bond. She was growing into her fire, and that fire was starting to catch light in the people around her. The next week an envelope arrived. No return address. No handwriting this time, only a small embossed card tucked inside. The world needs more voices like hers. Consider this a beginning. Inside was a scholarship application form for a junior speech and debate summer camp held at a private university 3 hours away. Expenses covered. Callan nearly dropped the form. "Someone's watching us again," he murmured. Lyra didn't blink. "Good. I want them to see." As spring approached, the children bloomed in their own ways. Aurelia, now donning her white coat like a second skin, spent afternoons drawing diagrams of the human heart and reading aloud to Rowan about the skeletal system, slowly turning the pages so he could touch and memorize. Lyra wrote essays even when no one asked for them. Her latest was titled, "Why Every Kid Deserves a Second Try." Mrs. Hewitt posted it on the school bulletin board. Parents began to notice. Rowan, once silent, began asking questions, not with words, but taps and gestures and touches that made more sense than any spoken sentence ever could. His world was opening piece by piece, with the help of sisters who refused to let him drift. Colin spent evenings watching them, not to supervise, but to marvel. And yet, despite everything they were building, he still felt the shadow of questions. About Vivian, about what it meant to receive help from someone you couldn't name, about whether this miracle he was living was something he'd have to pay for one day. He kept the envelope in the drawer with the others. He didn't know where it all led, but every time he looked at Lyra bold as thunder, or Aurelia patient as rain, or Rowan blinking at the wind like he could feel the world again, he knew he wouldn't trade it for anything. That night, as the fire cracked low and the children slept soundly, Callan stepped outside with a blanket draped over his shoulders. The stars were out. The pines were quiet. And somewhere he knew a woman he hadn't seen since the auction still watched from afar, not as a benefactor, not as a stranger, but as something far more mysterious and maybe far more personal than he'd ever dared to imagine. It began with a receipt. Callan found it wedged between the pages of Rowan's favorite Braille storybook, likely slipped there by small, curious fingers. At first he thought it was nothing, a slip of paper left over from one of the donation boxes that had appeared now and then on their porch. But this one had a printed name. Second Light Foundation, Disbursement Office, and beneath it in small, refined cursive V. Hartley Callan froze. Hartley. He'd seen that name before on the edge of a news article about a female billionaire who disappeared from the public eye years ago. A tech entrepreneur turned philanthropist, an orphan herself. And the name Second Light he'd heard that whispered once in a town council meeting when someone mentioned a fund that quietly paid off overdue lunch debts for kids across 3 counties. He stared at the receipt for a long time. His hands felt cold. He hadn't gone looking for answers, but maybe it was time. The following morning, Callan loaded up the truck, leaving the kids with Miss Louise, who'd become something of an honorary aunt since that first cocoa and cookies encounter. He drove 2 hours north into the city, where glass buildings loomed like frozen waterfalls, and traffic lights blinked above crowds that had no time to look at one another. He found the address listed on the receipt, a modest office in a quiet downtown block with no sign on the door, just a brass number and a buzzer. When he pressed it, a voice answered. Second Light. I'm looking for Vivian Hartley. A pause. Do you have an appointment? No. But I think she might have saved my life. I'd just like 5 minutes. Another pause. Longer this time. Then come in. The lobby was clean and quiet. Soft music played from somewhere unseen, nothing dramatic, just a piano melody that settled gently into the bones. A woman in a charcoal suit greeted him. Mr. Brooks. He nodded. She opened a frosted glass door and gestured him through. Ms. Hartley doesn't meet with many people, but she asked to be notified if anyone ever came asking for her directly. Callan's throat tightened. Why, you'll have to ask her. Vivian Hartley sat behind a desk of pale oak, surrounded by windows, that looked out on the quiet edge of the city. She was older than the photo he remembered, late 40s, maybe 50, but her face held the same sharpness, the same poised stillness. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a simple sweater and slacks. Her hair was tied back, and in front of her sat a cup of untouched tea. When Callan entered, she stood slowly. Mr. Brooks. He hesitated. You know me. I've known you since the auction. His jaw clenched slightly. You paid for those girls. I helped, she said gently. You were the one who couldn't walk away. Callan stepped closer. Why, Vivian took a slow breath. Because once someone walked away from me. I was 7. Foster system. I thought someone would come. They didn't. So when I saw you, what you did, it was like watching a wound I never knew could heal begin to close. He said nothing, just stood there, absorbing every word like a page he couldn't yet turn. Vivian gestured to the seat across from her. Please, sit. They talked for almost an hour. Vivian explained that she'd created Second Light to help quietly without publicity or praise. She sought out people who didn't ask for help, but chose compassion anyway. Callan was one of them. I didn't want to interfere, she said. I just wanted to keep the light on so you could keep walking. Callan's voice cracked. You saved us more than once. No, she said, her tone softer now. You saved them. I just helped carry the lantern. Before he left, Callan stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame. I thought miracles were bigger, he said. Louder. Vivian smiled faintly. The real ones are quiet. They let you believe you did it all yourself. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, Your daughter, Lyra. She reminds me of who I might have become if someone had rescued me sooner. He blinked. You remember her name? I remember everything. That evening back at the cabin, the air felt different. He didn't tell the children everything, just that he'd met someone kind. Someone who had helped them quietly and believed in what they were becoming. Lyra pressed him. Was she pretty, Callan chuckled. I guess that depends. On what? The invitation came in a thick ivory envelope sealed with gold foil and addressed in ornate handwriting. To the Brooks family. Callan almost threw it out, assuming it was another charity flyer or bulk mail from a medical fundraiser. But inside was a formal letter from the Regional Children's Council announcing that Lyra Brooks had been chosen to receive their annual Voice of Courage Award. They were inviting her, her family, and her guardians to a small ceremony held at the county hall. Is this a mistake? Callan asked aloud, rereading the letter. Lyra peeked over his shoulder. Nope. I'm awesome. Callan stared at her. What? She shrugged. You think I told that lunchroom story for free? The event was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Spring had come to the mountains, at last. Real spring, the kind with wildflowers curling up from damp soil and bees bumbling against sunlit window panes. Aurelia found an old sewing kit and mended the fraying hem of her favorite dress, determined not to let the loose threads ruin the occasion. Rowan tried on 3 shirts before Aurelia helped him pick one with tiny white buttons and a collar he called the itchy kind. Colin, for his part, dug out the only jacket he owned that wasn't flannel and prayed it still fit. He hadn't worn it since Rowan's baptism. It was tight across the shoulders now, but it would do. Vivian Hartley, when she heard about the ceremony, offered to send a tailor. Callan refused. We have everything we need. The county hall was grand, in the way old American buildings are white pillars, wide steps, and the faint scent of lemon wax and old paper lingering in the walls. The auditorium seated 100, maybe more, and that night every seat was filled. 5 of them sat together in the front row. 5 seats. 1 family. Lyra sat in the middle, fidgeting with the strap of her sandals, whispering jokes to Rowan that made him snort with laughter. Aurelia sat tall and silent, her white coat folded neatly on her lap, even though she wasn't wearing it. Callan rested his hands on his knees, nerves prickling behind his collar. He was proud, deeply so, but also uneasy in the spotlight. He'd never liked recognition. He was more comfortable under a broken pipe than under bright lights. Then they called Lyra's name. She walked to the podium with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. Her dress swayed gently with each step. Her curly hair had been tied back in a blue ribbon, the same one from her first day of school. The crowd clapped. The applause was warm, unforced, genuine. Lyra took the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the audience. Her voice was clear and certain. I used to think being loud made you bad, she began. I thought if I talked too much, people would stop listening. But then someone told me that voices aren't meant to be quiet. They're meant to be used, especially for people who are too scared to speak. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She continued, My name is Lyra Brooks. I'm 6, almost 7, and I used to be very small in the world. But someone gave me a chair at the table, and now I want to make room for others. The room was still. Then someone stood and clapped. Others followed. Within seconds, the entire hall rose in a standing ovation. Lyra beamed. Callan didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands had come together in front of his mouth, covering the softest sob he'd ever tried to hide. After the ceremony, parents and teachers, and even a local judge came over to shake hands and ask for photos. Someone offered Lyra a tour of the local civic youth board. Someone else asked if Aurelia might want to visit the Children's Medical Center lab downtown. Rowan stood close to his dad, leaning gently against his leg. Callan looked down and realized the boy was trembling, not from fear, but from overstimulation. He knelt and touched his son's arm gently. You okay? Rowan tapped his knee. 1. Pause. 1. Yes. Callan smiled. You did good, bud. All of you. Then he saw her. Standing at the far end of the lobby near the tall double doors was Vivian Hartley, No bodyguard, no assistant, no grand entrance. Just her in a pale green coat, with a silk scarf tied at the collar. She caught Callan's eye and offered a small smile. He excused himself from the group and walked over slowly, still unsure what to call her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure I should," she replied. "You belong here," Callan said simply. Vivian's eyes softened. "Thank you." He hesitated, then asked, "Why did you choose us?" She looked past him toward the 3 children laughing beside the refreshment table. "I didn't choose you," she said. "I recognized you. There's a difference. Choosing implies power. Recognition implies fate." He let that sit between them for a moment. Then he said something he hadn't said in over a decade. "Would you like to come by the house sometime?" Vivian blinked. "I would." That night, after the kids were tucked in, and the jacket was hung back on its lonely nail by the front door, Callan sat with a cup of tea and a pencil in his hand. He opened his journal, the one he never showed anyone, and wrote. There were 5 seats at the front of that hall tonight. 1 for a girl with fire. 1 for a girl with healing hands. 1 for a boy learning how to see without eyes. 1 for a man who didn't know he was strong. And 1 for the woman who kept the light on long enough for all of us to find our way. He closed the book. Outside the porch, light flickered, once then held steady. And somewhere inside him, so did the future. The first time Vivian Hartley stayed for dinner, it was meatloaf night. Nothing special. No fancy linens, no candlelight. Just a scratched-up wooden table chipped plates and the smell of Worcestershire sauce lingering in the air. But to Callan, it might as well have been a banquet. Vivian arrived with a basket of fresh bread still warm, wrapped in a linen towel. "I wasn't sure what went with meatloaf," she said, as Callan took her coat. "You brought bread," he said. "You could have brought gravel, and it still would have made the night better." She smiled, her eyes soft, behind her reading glasses. The children had scrubbed everything twice. Lyra even combed Rowan's hair twice, though he hated the way it tickled his scalp. Aurelia wore her white coat like a uniform, serious and proud. Callan had worried it might feel forced, but it didn't. It felt good, uncomplicated, like warmth finding its way into cold rooms that had long forgotten what it felt like. They talked over dinner about small things. Rowan's new interest in chess, Lyra's plan to start a petition for a bigger library shelf, Aurelia's diagrams that were now taking up every inch of available wall space in the hallway. Vivian listened intently. She didn't interrupt. She didn't patronize. She asked follow-up questions like someone who truly wanted to know them. "You remember all this?" Lyra marveled halfway through the meal. Vivian's voice was soft. "When you've spent most of your life being forgotten, remembering others becomes a kind of devotion." After dessert, peach cobbler from a can, and instant whipped cream, Callan stepped out onto the porch while the kids argued over who got the last spoonful. He needed air. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because something inside him was rising, like the tide, like memory, like the ache of something good finally within reach. Vivian joined him a moment later, folding her arms against the breeze. They stood in silence for a while, watching the moonlight stitch silver across the pines. "She's going to change things," Callan said, nodding toward the door. "Lyra. Maybe Aurelia, too." Vivian smiled faintly. "They already are." He looked over at her. "You made that possible." "No," she said firmly. "You did." Callan leaned against the railing. "I don't always feel like the man they think I am." "They don't think anything," she replied. "They know. They live it." There was something about the way she said it, unapologetic, unpolished, that made him feel more seen than he'd felt in years. "Why us?" he asked again, even though they'd had that conversation. Vivienne turned toward him. Because your heart said yes when everyone else said no. The porch light flickered as it sometimes did, then steadied. Callan chuckled. That thing's held together with tape and prayer. Vivienne glanced up. Sometimes that's enough. Then, as naturally as the wind, she said, "Do you ever let someone take care of you?" He didn't answer at first. He wasn't sure he knew how. I think he said slowly, "I've been waiting so long to do the rescuing. I forgot I might need some too." Vivienne reached out and touched his hand, not dramatically, not in any way that demanded more, just long enough to say you're not alone anymore. And that was all he needed. Over the weeks that followed, Vivienne visited more often. Not every day. Not enough to disrupt the rhythm Callan had built, but enough to become part of it. She brought groceries sometimes, books, a tiny microscope for Aurelia, a pocket chessboard for Rowan, a journal with an embossed cover for Lyra that read, "Your voice matters." And more importantly, she stayed for dinner. She helped with dishes. She read aloud while the kids did their homework. She never tried to replace anyone. She simply showed up consistently, gently, wholly. One afternoon in late May, Rowan fell asleep with his head in Vivienne's lap as she read from a book of fables. Callan walked in and froze in the doorway, watching her brush his hair back with a tenderness that nearly undid him. "You know," he said quietly, "he never used to fall asleep around people. Not even me when he was little." Vivienne looked up. "Then I won't move." Callan crossed the room, sat beside her on the floor, and exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I thought love like this came once," he admitted. "And if you lost it, that was it." "It doesn't come once," she said. "It comes when you're ready. And sometimes, only sometimes, you're lucky enough to recognize it." They sat there a long time. No declarations, no confessions. Just the hum of peace finally allowed to exist without question. That night, Rowan stirred in his sleep and murmured a word Callan hadn't heard from him before. "Mama." Vivienne, halfway out the door, turned. Callan whispered, "He never said that before." She blinked, tears suddenly threatening. Then it wasn't me he meant. Callan smiled. Maybe not. Maybe it was something he felt tonight. Safety. Presence. Love. She stood there a moment longer, then left the porch light on behind her. Just like always. The end of the school year brought with it a sudden flurry of firsts. Rowan had his first classroom performance, standing at the front of his class, with Aurelia beside him, reciting a poem they had memorized together. He couldn't see the faces in the crowd, but he could feel the applause warm and surrounding like sunlight on skin. Lyra received her first official invitation to join the junior speech team at the state level. Her essay, "A Quiet Kid's Guide to Being Loud," had been published in the local newspaper, prompting an outpouring of letters from readers twice her age. Aurelia completed her first anatomy model, pieced together from cardboard, string, and patience, and her teacher whispered to Callan during pickup, "She's the most focused child I've ever met." But what caught Callan most off guard was the letter Aurelia handed him on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. "It's for you," she said, simply tucking it into the pocket of his flannel shirt before skipping off to make tea for Rowan. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Callan unfolded the letter and read it beneath the flickering light of the old lamp in the corner. "Dear Dad, I call you that now, because it's what you are. You didn't pick us from a catalog or take us because it was easy. You stepped into a fire and never looked back. And I think that's what being a father really is. You didn't just give us a home, you gave us space to become people. Rowan can hear the world now, not with his ears, but with his hands and heart. Lyra shouts when it matters and listens when it counts. And me, I'm learning how to fix things. I think one day I'll fix people too. but only because you fixed something in me first. Thank you for choosing the hard thing, for staying, for teaching us how to stay too. Love, Aurelia. Callan folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling, not from age, but from wonder. He placed it in the wooden box beneath his bed, along with a collection of other sacred things, the receipt from the auction, Rowan's first drawing, Lyra's first petition, and a single note from Vivienne that read, "You are the good that lasts." The next morning he found Lyra sitting on the porch steps, legs tucked beneath her, scribbling into a notebook. She didn't look up when he joined her. Writing another speech, he teased gently. Not a speech, she said. A letter. To who? To the kid who lives here next. Callan blinked. Next. She shrugged. Someday someone else might need this porch, these walls. I just want them to know they're already part of something good. He reached out and mussed her hair. You're an old soul. I'm just a loud one, she grinned. That afternoon, Aurelia found Callan in the shed out back, organizing old tools and oil cans. Can I ask you something, she said, standing in the doorway in her white coat. Always. If I go to medical school one day, and it takes me far away, would you be okay? Callan set down the wrench he was holding. He walked over, crouched so they were eye level. I want you to go as far as your feet and faith can carry you, he said. And wherever you land, you'll still be mine. She blinked. But we're not yours. He placed a hand gently over her heart. You are. In every way that matters. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, burying her face into his chest. Callan held her a long time. That evening, Vivienne arrived unannounced, not with groceries or books or quiet charity, but with a single envelope. This came today, she said, her voice carrying a weight it hadn't before. Callan opened it and scanned the contents slowly. A legal notice. Full parental guardianship awarded to Callan Brooks for Aurelia and Lyra. It was done. No more temporary. No more paperwork. No more waiting. He looked up at Vivienne, stunned. You made this happen. No, she said. You did, but her eyes glistened. You're family now, she added softly. Callan nodded, voice thick. So are you. She hesitated. I never thought I'd be included in something again. You're not included, he said, taking her hand. You're woven in. That night, for the first time, they lit the fireplace, not for warmth, but for celebration. Lyra performed a dramatic reading of the guardianship letter. Rowan clapped louder than anyone. Aurelia insisted on baking cookies with too much flour and not enough patience. And Vivienne stayed long after the dishes were done. She stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Callan sweep crumbs from the floor. You look tired, she said. I am, he replied, but it's a good kind, isn't it? He turned to face her. Yeah, the kind that makes you feel alive. She stepped closer. I've been thinking about not disappearing this time. He reached for her hand. Then stay. And this time, she did. Later, as everyone slept, and the fire crackled low, Callan opened his journal and wrote, We were strangers bound by circumstance. Now we're a constellation of second chances. This house used to be quiet. Now it sings. Outside, a summer wind whispered through the trees. Inside, 5 hearts slept in harmony. And somewhere between then and now, between who they were and who they'd become, they had stitched together something far rarer than safety, forever. It began like any other morning. Birdsong sifted through the open window, and sunlight curled around the curtains like it had been waiting for permission to enter. Callan Brooks stood in the kitchen barefoot on the cool floorboards, flipping pancakes with one hand while pouring coffee with the other. A delicate sort of peace filled the cabin, the kind that doesn't arrive loudly, but through 1,000 small, hard-won victories. Rowan was the first one to shuffle in his steps, steady, confident now. He reached the table without guidance and tapped the edge twice. Yes, he was ready for breakfast. "You want maple or berry today, bud?" Callan asked. Rowan smiled, then tapped again. "Berry. Good choice." Lyra burst in next, halfway through an argument she was having with herself about whether pine trees should count as an architectural feature in her latest Save the Forest speech. She tossed her notebook onto the couch, grabbed a banana, and started pacing. "You're giving a speech in your pajamas now," Callan teased. She didn't stop moving. "Genius doesn't wait for laundry." Aurelia entered quietly, as always, in her neatly pressed shirt and stethoscope still hanging around her neck, though this time it was purely symbolic. She had a summer internship at the rural clinic in town, shadowing nurses and gently correcting them when they used outdated terminology. Vivian followed close behind, carrying a basket of folded laundry and humming a song no one quite recognized, though everyone felt like they should. She smiled when she caught Callan's eye. No need for words. They had long since moved past the need for explaining what they were to each other. Later that afternoon, the family gathered outside near the edge of the woods. Rowan wanted to plant something his very first garden. A modest one with tomatoes and marigolds, because they both come back even if the wind knocks them down. Callan knelt beside him, helping him press seeds into the earth, while Lyra held up a makeshift cardboard sign she had painted, "Rowan's Garden of Second Tries." Vivian took a photo, not for social media, not for a newsletter, just for them. Aurelia stood at the edge of the clearing gazing upward at a hawk circling above the pines. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that Mom would have been proud?" Callan looked at her. "She'd be in awe," he said. Then, after a pause, "But not just of you, of what you became, because you refused to become what she was." Aurelia nodded. No tears, just quiet strength. "Thanks for staying," she said. "I always will." That evening they built a fire in the backyard, not because it was cold, but because it felt like something worth gathering around. The stars began to blink alive one by one, and the forest hummed with the slow song of a world at rest. Vivian handed each of them a small envelope. "I thought we could try something," she said. Inside each envelope was a blank sheet of paper. "A letter to your future self," she explained. "Write what you want to remember, or what you never want to forget." They wrote in silence, each one lit by firelight and memory. Rowan, with Aurelia's help, traced his message letter by letter. "I learned to listen even when I couldn't hear. That's my superpower." Lyra's was short, bold, underlined twice. "Don't ever be quiet if the world needs your voice." And it always does. Aurelia's was delicate medical script, already forming in her hand. Even pain can lead to purpose, but only if you let love walk beside it. Vivian folded hers without reading aloud. Callan hesitated. He looked around at the circle of lives that had once been fragments now fitted together like mosaic glass. Imperfect. Radiant. He wrote, "A man doesn't become a father the day a child is born. He becomes one the day he refuses to let them be alone." They placed the letters in a wooden box, not to be buried, but kept on the mantel beside the framed photo of the 5 of them standing outside the cabin, arms linked, smiles honest. Callan slid his arm around Vivian's shoulders as she rested her head against him. "You ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't been there that night at the auction?" "No," she said, "because I was, and you were. That's all that matters." He kissed the top of her head. "We're not a miracle, you know," he murmured. "No," she agreed. "We're what comes after the miracle. The choice to live like it mattered." That night before bed, Rowan asked if he could leave his window open. "Sure," Callan said. "Why I like to listen," Rowan said. "To the trees, to the wind, to everything that says we're still here. Callan stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching his son sleep. He walked back to the living room, where Vivian was folding a blanket, where Aurelia was outlining next week's clinic rotation, where Lyra was drawing plans for a treehouse, where the world, his world, was alive and ordinary and astonishing. And he whispered to no one in particular, "This is the everyday miracle. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us feel a little closer across the miles." Every story finds its home in the hearts of those who need it. And sometimes, that's all it takes. If you'd like to hear more stories that lift the spirit and remind us of the quiet miracles around us, feel free to subscribe. We're building something meaningful here, and it means so much to have you along the way. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending this time with us.